Hello, I'm Dr. Mark Pearson, a consultant psychiatrist in psychotherapy. I wanted to talk this time about where you might look if you think that things outside your conscious awareness are influencing you and causing you some distress, some symptoms, particularly symptoms of anxiety and depression. We've had some help with this by the founding fathers. They are mostly men, but one's a woman, who say that they think that certain specific things which may cause us problems. Let's start with Freud, because he was the earliest and the founder of psychoanalysis. And for Freud, the area in which you should look are in areas of sexual abuse. Now, Freud thought that we all begin life much earlier than we think with feelings of sensuality and even sexuality, and these can be exploited by our parents. And he thought that as many as 50% of us have some unwanted experience in our early childhood. Now, this can be anything from a single episode where, say, somebody exposes themselves to you in the street, to something much more repetitive and profound and disturbing. And a typical example is where a step-parent, often a stepfather, comes in and is inappropriately sexual to the extent of actually forcing sex on a young child. You may think that you would always know about this and it wouldn't be difficult to uncover it, but what we found is people can be quite unaware of the fact that these things have happened to them until perhaps they see a documentary or a fictional drama on television in which sexual abuse takes place, and then they're very frightened and disturbed and sometimes have to turn the program off. And if you have this sort of evidence, you might well want to look back with a therapist or with a friend into what happened in the early years of your childhood and see if you can come up with some corroborating evidence that this took place. The topic is quite difficult because, as we said in the last talk, it's possible for people to have false memories as well as true memories of this. And if the therapist is too interested in the topic of sexual abuse, as possibly Freud was, you may find that through suggestibility the idea is implanted in your mind. So I would caution you to be sceptical and to look for some evidence from your brothers and sisters or a parent figure that you do trust, sometimes other members of the family, that this is likely to have taken place. So that's Freud, who thought that we are disturbed by sexual events that take place mainly in the first 5 years of our childhood. The next person we could consider is Carl Jung, who for a while agreed with Freud and still thought to the end of his life that there were these personal events that would be very troubling for people. But Jung, as he went on, thought that there was things that we all collectively had that could disturb us if we didn't follow these through. Jung's idea was that there was a collective form of unconscious which sort of told us instinctively how to bond to our parents, how to then separate from them, how to get married, how to court, and in our later life how to be creative and how to make good lasting relationships, and then how to integrate our experiences and prepare ourselves for death. Jung thought that people were greatly helped by being attached to a community and possibly to some form of spirituality, and that without this people could become lost and feel quite depressed and that life had no meaning. So if these sort of thoughts make sense to you, and perhaps particularly if you feel you've lost your way and life has become rather flat and without purpose, then Jung and trying to understand where you are in relation to your community and the beliefs and culture that you come from may be more the type of thing which you want to look for to understand what's disturbing you. So not all problems have to come in the first 5 years of life, and you could be quite unconscious of things which are perhaps in Jung's terms, a failure to progress, to go through the normal stages of life. Historically, the next person to really try to investigate things which we are unaware of, which disturbed us, was Melanie Klein. And she thought that rather than sexuality being the problem was more one of aggression, and that people had sort of an innate predatory and destructive impulses which they found quite antisocial and which they would want to deny and repress. For Melanie Klein, the main area of problem was that the young child was very dependent on the mother and could resent and feel very frightened when the mother took herself away, as of course mothers and fathers have to do. And the child might then, instead of feeling gratitude for the things that nurtured them, might then attack them and try and destroy them because they experienced them as threatening things rather than as nurturing, helpful things. Now, if we take these ideas forward a bit to the current thinking about all this, some of these come together in what's called attachment theory. Children obviously are born quite dependent and relatively helpless, and they have to form attachments to their caretakers, for good or ill. One can investigate this a bit by seeing what happens when you remove the caretaker from the child, and this would be an experimental situation, but it does allow us to have some confidence that some people react when the caretaker goes away with a bit of distress, but can tolerate the presence of a stranger in the room and can still carry on to explore the environment. And when the caretaker, usually the mum, comes back, they greet her with affection, they bond back to her with a sort of physical relationship, and they carry on exploring the environment. Other people, given the same circumstances, react quite differently. Some of them with a complete sense of disinterest in the environment. They don't explore it, and when the mother comes back they ignore her, and these people are thought to have avoidant attachment behaviours and to probably find relationships don't mean much to them and they avoid having them, and they're often experienced as being rather cold and difficult people. This may affect about 10 to 20% of people. And the third pattern of attachment, which can be observed, is that when the mother comes back, the child reacts with a great deal of distress and crying and clinging, and this goes on for some time. And these people are said to be ambivalent about relationships. They both feel they need them very much, they fear being abandoned, and they're really quite anxious about their partners in future life, and particularly anxious about the ideas of separation and abandonment. Now, these ideas have become current partly because they can be observed and in a predictable way, and they do seem to show that what happens to us in our first relationships, in our bonding to our initial caretaker, carries on and greatly influences the type of relationships we make in later life. The ideas from Freud and Jung and Klein, which I've described, have not gone out of currency, but they're not scientific theories in the sense that they can't be falsified, and I think people have become sceptical about them, although you'll be aware that the topic of sexual abuse of children has never gone away, and indeed its prevalence, which was thought once to be of the order of maybe 5-10%, has become as high as 50 to 60% of people who actually do describe unwanted sexual experiences. So when you're looking for these things, I think you might try to investigate the type of relationship you had with your mum and dad, and perhaps with your sibs and anyone else who was important in caring for you in early life. You might try to think about episodes which you remember where you've had unwanted sexual experiences. You might try to think about times when you felt very angry and envious, and that people have things which are better than yours and which you want to attack and destroy. And you might try to think about whether you're integrated into your community, whether you're meeting your spiritual and creative needs for what you provide as a good life, and whether these things could underlie some of your symptoms of anxiety and depression.